Jennifer Wright with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. Today we're going to go over our Derelict Building Grant Program. Some of you, I saw some cities in the listing who've been successful in applying for and receiving grant funds from the Iowa DNR for our program. So it's nice to see your names and faces. But a little bit about this program. It was specifically developed to work with rural communities that have populations of 5,000 or fewer. And it was focused on issues posed by abandoned commercial buildings. We tend to fund those buildings that are on Main Street predominantly, but we have done other commercial buildings in and around various communities if they were blighted, clearly abandoned, and also owned by the city. Each fiscal year, we get $400,000 allocated to this program, and we will reimburse in 7 different areas that help remove an environmental hazard, minimize the budget issues for the city, and improve your community appearance. So we focus on environmental studies, and that is like asbestos inspections, phase 1 and phase 2, environmental inspections, and oftentimes we'll fund engineering analysis too. And then we also look at funding deconstruction versus demolition, and we specifically state deconstruction because that means like the specific dismantling of a building. That way you have materials that you can then divert from the landfill. And then the other area is renovation. As mentioned under the deconstruction, the priority of this program is to increase landfill diversion through that recycling and reuse of building materials. So that's the primary measure of this program. So it started in 2011, and these numbers are through 2018. I literally just got most of the information for the 2019 projects finished. And so that data will actually be updated on our GIS map, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I'm still awaiting one project to conclude. This summer was challenging for them due to rain in June and then the derecho in what was that, August? So this isn't reflective of 2019, but it's a good representation of the type of coverage and outreach that we've had since our inception. Again, it was 153 communities from 2011 to 2018. We've had 9.5 million requested, and 2.7 of that's been reimbursed over that period of time. And each project really focuses on the resources and the skills that are unique to each community. A lot of times there'll be a variety of people that come together to find reuse markets, and then also provide technical assistance when these structures are honestly very blighted and need to be addressed for the community. Some eligibility requirements, and this is key because I've gotten a lot of calls over the past year, people just not sure about if they're eligible or not. Again, it must be owned by a city, or the city must be in the process of owning it. So when you apply for a grant, you have to show that it's either through eminent domain or the city is taking ownership, like with a dollar payment.
Did they send in the?
There's a letter in the application showing that ownership will be transferred. A building must be abandoned for at least 6 months. We don't, honestly, a lot of times we don't get very many applications where the building's not been abandoned for more than 6 months. Clearly, it wouldn't be derelict if it had only been abandoned for 6 months. So that's something to think about. We like nuisance buildings, honestly, though, and sometimes the worse condition, maybe the better, because we're more inclined to look at the hazard and the risk to your community and be supportive of helping you address that blighted structure. We will not approve any building that is on the National Historic Register. And there's some caveats too, even if you have a National Historic community, like a lot of times the city square may be delegated as a historic district, you would need to work with the State Historic Preservation Office and get clarification on whether or not that building within that district is on their list. And that is not something that falls to DNR. You'll need to ensure that you know your status before you apply. A lot of times we encourage applicants to partner with local nonprofits, but this gets back to the city must be owned. The building must be owned by the city. So application requirements, we need you to have ownership by the time we would contract with you. We do require a cash match, and insurance coverage. Typically, many cities have insurance coverage. It's usually $1 million or more. We want you to identify the reuse markets for any of the building materials that would be coming out. And that can be done through work and assistance with the Iowa Waste Exchange. We like to know the history of the building and if you have a plan for deconstruction or renovation. So what's it going to be after you take care of this building? Oftentimes, obviously renovation is easier to describe because a lot of times you're just renovating the exterior of the structure, and then you guys are going to maybe a city might market it for another use. The deconstruction, we would want to have some idea of what you intend to do with that property once the building is taken down. And sometimes, it's green space, and we've approved those projects, so that would be fine. We want to have support letters in there, not just from the Iowa Waste Exchange, but anybody else you can get support letters from would be great. And then color photos. The application requires color photos of the outside, but if you can get pictures of the inside, it is highly recommended because it shows, if it shows the condition of the building, like if it shows that the entire upper floor has collapsed into the lower floor, that's clearly going to indicate that the building is derelict. So as I kind of touched on under the deconstruction portion, again, if you're going to reuse the site, make sure you have a general plan. Is it going to be commercial? Is it going to be green space? What are the uses of that site? And describe that in the application. So a couple of case studies that kind of show you the difference between like a deconstruction project and renovation. So this was one of our earliest projects. This was done in 2011. It was in the city of Guthrie Center. And it was actually a very successful project. And they had asked for assistance doing asbestos abatement and deconstruction on this 2-story building. It was about 6,000 square feet. And the goal was to either allow the drugstore that was adjacent and connected to this building to expand, or to create an open lot that they had hoped to market to maybe any commercial entities. This building, as you can tell by some of the pictures, had significant leaks in the roof, and it was allowing water to get into the structure. And so floors and walls were deteriorating. There was mold, and the city had a concern that because this building had a shared wall with the drugstore, that it would also cause that building to deteriorate. And in the process, take it down with it. So When they approached us, we gave them a project funds for abatement and deconstruction. They originally identified about 70% diversion in their application, but they actually reached a final diversion number of 77%. And that's significant because anytime a city chooses to do a deconstruction project, if you are over 30% or more in diversion of materials, we start incentivizing the city. So in like about $5,000 increments. And once you're over 71%, typically you get an additional 25,000 for your project. And that can make a big difference in the budget for some of your smaller communities. In this case, they worked with a local contractor and in cooperation with the Iowa Waste Exchange, and they found reuse markets for, the concrete, the brick, and some of the mortar. A lot of those materials were also used by local farmers for erosion control, and then they used them in local road projects as base. And then ironically, they kind of made a small green space out of it, and the community liked it so much that then they built in this area towards the front of the property, which is right on Main Street, with tables and different places to sit, and gave their residents a small green space in a park off of Main Street. And then this is a picture showing when RAGBRAI came through in 2013. Clearly, there were a lot of riders taking advantage of this nice green space. So, they had a plan. They thought to market it for another business, and then realized that in this case, the green space in a small park area was just what their Main Street needed. The next project was in Glidden, and this was in 2014. And this one's a really fun project because they chose to renovate this structure and use this former office space that was for a small local newspaper and convert it into a fitness center for the community. Basically, the owners of this building, when they closed their paper, just vacated it. And in essence, the new owners didn't want the building. So they basically transitioned it to the city. So this kind of shows you just a picture of the exterior. You saw the previous version. This is in the process of renovating this structure, where they put in new windows and a new door. We funded brick tuck pointing and some roof work. You're looking at a picture of the interior where they converted it into a wellness/fitness center. The picture on the right, which is dated 11/21/2014, is actually an elevated portion of the building where they made it into like a aerobics studio, and also that wood floor, which actually came from the building. They took it out and they basically they fixed it and put it back in, and it became like their track around and through the entire building. And this was kind of the last, this is what it looked like when it was all finished. And when we went to their open house and ribbon cutting in December of 2014. And the great thing is that they had surpassed their membership goals. The community has continued to enjoy this resource, and Glidden has welcomed us back several times so that we could, show our commissioners this project. And again, it's just a really nice way to bring a resource to the community from what was a blighted structure. And the last case study is Malvern, and this was again another 2013 project. This was to complete rehabilitation efforts again on a building that was on their main street. In this case, it was the 401 and the 403. It's two buildings. And with this grant, the city had requested funding from the DNR to do a structural analysis, because as you can tell from the picture on the right, the entire roof had basically collapsed into the building. And then they needed to do asbestos testing and removal, and then rehabilitation of that structure. So this is what it looks like when they got in there and they actually removed the roof that had collapsed in. Obviously, when it fell, it took the 2 different floors with it. And the other picture to the right is just kind of showing it during construction. But so the city did this in conjunction with the Malvern Area Betterment Association. And what we helped fund was stabilizing the south wall and funding the asbestos inspection and removal. And now the building has been rebuilt. It has 2 floors again that are stable and ready for a business. In fact, there is a new business in it now. The roof was replaced, the windows and the doors were replaced. And then the facade in this case was reconstructed as part of work with the Economic Development Authority and their CDBG program. And then significant to this was from a landfill diversion perspective, only the materials that were still attached to the roof and collapsed were taken to the landfill. Any other materials were repurposed in the building itself. So this is the final product. It's actually now a drugstore. And again, here's an example of RAGBRAI, community being one of the direct cities that RAGBRAI would go through, and people enjoying their main street and the use of this building. Bottom line is the city made it a priority to reuse this building. They felt that if they, in essence, demolished it, it would have had a negative impact on sort of the feel and look of their downtown area. So their choice was to deconstruct and then reconstruct. But again, it just shows that you can do a lot of things with this program and with your buildings on Main Street. And in this case, they felt that reconstruction was the best choice, and now it has a pharmacy and a home care business. So to kind of wrap it up, some major achievements of this program, and we're really proud of it, is that, again, from 2011 to 2018, we've reimbursed over 2.6 million to the various participating communities. We've achieved 2.3 million in landfill disposal savings for the participating communities. Basically, almost 62,000 tons of construction and demolition materials have been diverted from Iowa landfills, and we've removed and addressed 1,139 tons of asbestos-containing materials, and those have been properly managed and disposed. So overall, it's been a very successful program, not only for the DNR, but for our rural communities across the state. And as you can probably saw early on the map, we've had really the pleasure or the advantage of covering the entire state. We've certainly been in all sort of 4 corners of the state and in central Iowa. So we're here to continue helping small communities, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. I think I did that right. Did I?
Thank you, Jennifer. I love seeing the before and after pictures.
Jennifer, I do have a quick question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just wondering, how long does the city have to own that property then? Can they be like a pass-through, or is it, like the pharmacy one?
So we don't, to be honest, we don't put anything in our contracts that state, the city must own for 5 years, or the project, if you applied for an open space it has to be an open space for 5 years. We don't specify that. I will tell you that if if it seems obvious that the city is like buying it for $1 to turn it back around to the previous owner, you won't get funded. Like that the review committee will question that.
Sure.
So, but if the city owns it and they have identified in a plan that, yeah, in 1 to 2 years, or in 6 months after the project's finished, we intend to put this property up for sale, that's fine.
Mhm.
But when you get into situations where it's clear that the city is going to take ownership only to convert it back to the previous owner,
Right.
which we've seen people do that or request that, then typically we don't fund those.
Have you
Because
had any
again, the
reuse?
major eligibility requirement.
Sure.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, have you had any reuse plans involving housing as far as like a nonprofit owning homes, or not homes, but apartment, style living? They're turned into that.
Yeah, no, well, I'm trying to think. No, we have not had anybody come to us and say want to transition an old school
Mhm.
to multifamily housing. We have not had that. I don't think we would be adverse to that, but we have not had that, usually because the few schools we have funded are in just such terrible condition. There's
Okay.
just not
Sure.
not an ability to really renovate that structure, and they're usually so big that it's really hard for a city to, in essence, take on the ownership and the kind of temporary maintenance of that type of structure. So that's the other thing. It has to be owned by the city.
Right.
So there was some misunderstandings early on in the program where we allowed cities and like the city to work with like maybe the county and take over maybe a county building. But if the county still owns it, then we won't approve it. It has to be owned by the city. And a lot of times cities don't want to take on old county, maybe, hospitals and things, because they're very large and very expensive to deconstruct. And typically the county has more money than the city. So in essence, it's kind of like, why are you deferring this to the city? But that's ultimately up to the cities and the counties if they want to partner together that way. But again, we will not fund a project that's owned by a county, only by a city.
Thank you. And then I know there was a question in the chat box, how long from application to completion?
Oh, to like in a contract. So just so you know, our new application deadline for fiscal year 22, which is this year coming up, 21, is February 26th of 2021. And we typically request submittals in February because obviously on average, we get about 40 applications a year. And that doesn't seem like too terribly large amount, but it's a lot when you're talking about multi-page grants and looking at letters and documentation. And so if we get them in February, we usually take the month of, in essence, March to review them. The review committee is made up of DNR rep, a Keep Iowa Beautiful representation, Economic Development Authority representation, and then we have some solid waste organizations on our review committee. One is the Iowa Solid Waste Operators Association and the Iowa Recycling Association. And then we usually have, gosh, I'm thinking, is there one? Yeah, no, that's it. That's the 5 of us. So we need about a month to review. And then any projects that are over $25,000 have to be approved by the DNR Environmental Protection Commission. And we usually have to have like a 30-day window to get them on their agenda. So we build that into the time frame. That the expectation is that we're taking those agreements to the commission at the end of April. And then in essence, contracts are getting written in May and very early June, and then getting signed by the cities in June, so that we can get kicked off on July. We typically don't allow a project to get initiated before July, because July 1 is when our new fiscal year starts. We have done some approval of asbestos abatement, like towards the end of June for some of the cities. And then, but they have to make sure that the invoice and or claim for that work basically shows July. In essence, we have to show that the work, in essence, is getting paid for in the new fiscal year and will reimburse you in the new fiscal year. Does that make sense? Hopefully, okay.
Yeah. Jennifer, I had a question too, and I'm sorry if I missed it, but what did you say about buildings on the National Register? Do you not touch them or not eligible?
So, right, we will not fund a project in a building that is on the National Historic Register. Now, there's been some questions come up recently about, well, what if my building's not on the register, but we're in like a historic district? Oftentimes we won't fund those either, but I don't want to say for sure that we wouldn't. I had mentioned early on that you should work with the State Historic Preservation Office to confirm the status of your building in that district. And then if it is one of those things where it's in a district, but it's not, they're able to parse it out and say it's not historic, then you'd have to submit a letter or some level of information from SHPO verifying that. But it falls to the city or their planning agency to work that out. So just.
Okay. I see we have another question. Can a city have a purchase agreement in which obtaining the grant is a contingency for the sale going through?
Yeah, we've allowed that in the past. So that would be fine. We would just want to have some clear verification that the city will definitely be the owner when the agreement would be signed. But we've done that in the past where there have been signed agreements that in essence, if they get the funding, it will transfer to the city. But I mean, I always recommend, because ironically, I'm one of the people that reads all of these grants and applications and scores them. So one, have a well-written application is always important, and have a plan. And if it's a deconstruction project, know how you're going to divert the materials. Have that all defined. But it is always better when the city owns the building. And mostly it's because there's just so much competition. As I mentioned, we get about 40 applications a year, and the requests range from anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million every year. And obviously we can only fund $400,000. So the better the app and the clarification on ownership is always going to make it a stronger application. But I will tell you, we try our hardest. If you have a truly, truly blighted structure and it is proving to be a hazard for your community, we will make an effort to help the city address that building, even if it's just to maybe even fund the asbestos work that first year that you apply, because that's our goal, is to ensure that there is not an environmental health and safety hazard to the community. And then the secondary goal is to ensure that materials are diverted from the landfill.
You probably mentioned this too. What was the match requirement?
So it's okay. It's kind of ranges, and it's on our website. So always go there and verify. But we will pay 100% for the asbestos inspection. And then it gets into a range. So for asbestos abatement, we will pay up to $10,000 for abatement, and anything above $10,000 that for asbestos removal will be split 50-50. So say, for example, you get a quote to remove asbestos in a building for $12,000, we'll cover 11 and you would cover 1,000. Does that make sense? Because that $2,000 above the $10,000 mark gets split 50-50. Engineering analysis, that's capped at about, I want to say $1,500 for each engineering for an engineering analysis. And then a phase 1 and a phase 2, I think, are around $1,500. If not a little bit more, but I apologize. I should have been prepared with that amount, but I don't. And then as far as deconstruction and renovation is a maximum of $50,000 with a 50% cost share. And then same with deconstruction, but on deconstruction, if you divert at 30% or higher, we have that incentive range. So it goes in $5,000 increments. So in theory, you could get up to $75,000 for a deconstruction project, because it's basically the $50,000 plus $25,000 for a maximum diversion amount. And it's all detailed on our website, which is, you can go to www.faba.gov, faba.gov, and then it'll pull up all of our programs, or you can just go to the DNR website, and in the search box on the main page, just put Derelict Building, and it'll pop up the Derelict Building page. And so we have a couple of drop downs. One is like how to apply to the program. Another one is information on the program, like typical questions, FAQs. And then you'll also see a map where you can click on different projects and see what they were, and diversion and things of that nature.
So the end use has to be commercial. It can't be residential, right?
Probably not. But honestly, that question's never been posed, and we've never actually had an application where that's come in.
Would it be considered?
I don't know. I mean, I guess if it was like, there's been like Main Street structures that have been renovated, and they have like a storefront on the main floor and they have residential on the upstairs, like they have two apartments, and we've approved those, but I don't know I cannot think of a project where we've turned it around and then said, yeah, you can build a house on that. I guess I don't know if we would restrict that. At the end of the day, it's really up to the city. It's about basically providing an option for the city to generate tax money. At the, when you have a blighted structure, you're not generating any revenue off of that property. But when you take it down, and even with green space, you aren't necessarily generating any revenue, but in some cases for communities that works better for them because they own the property and it's a place where the community can gather. We've had some where they take the building down and they use it as a farmer's market space in the spring and summer months. So, we're not going to necessarily tell you what the end use needs to be, but the preference is given by the review committee for, in essence, properties that have a defined end use. So if that's, a commercial building where you can make tax revenue, or it's a green space where the community benefits, those tend to be the preference, but I don't know if we'd be too keen on taking like a Main Street building down and then putting up a residential house. But if it's like a multifamily dwelling, I don't know. I can't say for sure.
There's a few other questions in the chat box, Jen.
Okay.
Let's see here. Can a city have a purchase agreement in which obtaining the grant is a contingency for the sale going through?
We answered that already.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
That's okay.
I missed my place here. Let's see.
I've got.
Okay, you got him. Okay, go ahead.
If a city owns a property with a house on it, can this grant be used for it?
No. Even if the city owns it, but if it's zoned residential, we will not fund it. Now, maybe it was an old house that became zoned commercial because a real estate agency occupied it. That's a possibility, but it has to do with the zoning.
Okay. And then, do you require or recommend doing a phase 1 study before a city obtains ownership?
Well, that's a tricky question because at the end of the day, a phase 1 basically helps the city identify their liability. Because a lot of times in phase 1 and phase 2s, you may uncover an old tank or another associated environmental hazard. So that's really the city's choice if they want to do that, if they want to take ownership. They certainly can request funds for a phase 1 and phase 2, but I would imagine if you're requesting like money for a phase 1 and phase 2, you're in the early stages of sort of or trying to take ownership. And so, again, not that should necessarily harm you, but given the competition, it may be where the review committee says, do we really want to fund that when, do they even own the building kind of thing? So, it's always good for a city to know the liability that they're accepting when they either get transferred these buildings or they utilize eminent domain or they even buy them for $1. But we won't mandate that. Like, we won't tell you have to do a phase 1 or phase 2.
Okay. Is there a place on the website you mentioned earlier where we can see a list of projects that have been funded?
That's on the GIS map. So it's right on the main page of the Derelict Building Grant Program, and you can hover over like the different cities and projects, and there should be a what am I at a loss for the words? An indicator of what the symbols are. Like we have used different symbols for different years and different colors so that you'll know like 2011, 2012, 2013. And then you can hover above it and it'll tell you what the project is. Or you can just say, I'm curious about a project in, I see Hopkinton, because they've recently received money. I'm curious about the project in Hopkinton, and I don't know if that one's up there yet. I don't think it is because that was 2019, right, Sarah?
Yes.
That will be going up hopefully in the next couple of weeks, but you could say, oh, what was their project? If you didn't really want to reach out to Sarah, but I'm sure Sarah would be more than happy to answer your questions on their project. But that's one I know we've done several in Southeast Iowa. Ironically, there's a ton of projects down there because it's a lot of really old derelict structures. Honestly, you could hover about any part of the state and you'll find a renovation or a deconstruction project, and it'll give you some information. And the other thing is if you want to know more about it that you can't get from the website, you can certainly give me a call or send me an email. I can give you that in my information if that is helpful. My email, just so you know, is Jennifer, JENNIFER .Wright, WRIGHT @DNR.Iowa, spelled out IOWA.gov. And quite honestly, that's usually the best way to get a hold of me is via email, especially now that we're mostly working from home. But you could call my work cell phone too, and that's 515-452-1794. And eventually when this position gets filled, we'll put the programmatic manager's name on the webpage, but right now it's just me.
Mhm. Well, I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much. This was great. I've never written a derelict building grant before. So.
Well, and I will tell you all too, you certainly can, we do require that you reach out to the Iowa Waste Exchange rep for your service area. And I want to say you might be mostly in Paige Alesh's territory, and probably Shelley Codner's.
And does Ben still do that? Ben Krigney, or?
I'm sorry, Holly, what was that?
I was just saying, Ben, I used to work with a Ben.
Oh, so Ben took a new job, and his replacement is Aaron.
Oh, okay.
And Aaron Boyd, and she's at Intercog.
Okay.
And then Paige Alesh is a waste exchange rep. They basically subcontract to the DNR. It is a DNR program that we subcontract each one of them to work for us to, in essence, be out in the communities and working with businesses to divert waste.
Okay.
But they would be there. They have to be brought into the project because they have to help you identify outlets for the materials. Mm-hmm. They also can, they'll also need to write a letter as to what they know about the project. But the other thing is that some of them will actually help you in writing your grant. Okay. So in fact, I would say all three of the ladies I have mentioned, which may have a little piece of your areas, would be helpful in developing a grant.
Okay.
So.
Cool.
That is good to know.
Yes.
So they won't write the whole thing for you, but they'll definitely
Oh,
help you.
darn.
But they'll definitely help you in identifying, like I said, markets, and like they've seen our work long enough. They're going to know too what are things that are going to work for the review committee and not necessarily work for the review committee. So
Is it typically the same review committee every year?
it has been the same review committee since 2012. Once in a while, we'll get a transition in representation organizations, but they've honestly had the same people interested and volunteering to review these grants since 2012. And then same with economic development. It's been, I want to say he's part of the Main Street, Iowa program at Economic Development Authority. And so he's also been on the review committee since early on, and I have too. So I'm probably not going anywhere anytime soon. But we may get transition in those other two organizations. KIB did get a new director, and so he just started. Most of the time, it's all right. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. I think we're losing you a little bit, so that's probably the internet gods saying we're done. And we thank you so much for your presentation. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Please, and like I said, please feel free to email me or call me if you have any additional questions.
And feel free.
And just a quick reminder, February 26th, 2021 is the deadline for the new year.
Okay.
So.
And feel free to stay on
All right.
the meeting here. So thank you. So our next speaker is our very own Dawn Danielson. She's the Economic Development Coordinator and Brownfields Project Manager. And she's going to talk about, you know, what to do if your community has an abandoned or underutilized commercial property. Dawn?
Hi, hopefully everybody can hear me. Good morning. My name is Dawn Danielson, and I am the Brownfields Project Manager and Economic Development Coordinator here at ECIA, as Marla has stated. I'm very excited to be part of today's meeting. Jen, thank you for your presentation. It's great to follow you because I think the two programs tie closely together, that the one that you spoke of the Derelict Building Grant Program, and now the Brownfields program that I administer. I administer two Brownfields programs here at ECIA, and today I'd like to discuss how these programs may benefit your community. I'd like to do a quick exercise. If you got a pencil or a pen, it'll be real quick here. I'd like you to jot down on a piece of paper property that's located in your town that maybe you've had concerns about the condition of it. It may be abandoned, vacant, deteriorating, or potentially you believe it might have contaminant present on the property. Just take a couple seconds to do that. And then the next item I'd like you to jot down is a property located in your community, which I'm sure everybody has one, that has been redeveloped, and that is something that you're proud of, or others in your community are proud of. I'll just give you a few seconds to jot down those two properties. Keeping in mind these two properties, my goal today is to have you think of the first site that you wrote down and how you can, and I'll help you to think about how you can change the status of that site from being one of concern to being more like the second site where it is one you're proud of. The Derelict Building Program that Jen mentioned, the Iowa Authority Program that will be after my presentation, and the Brownfield programs that I administer, all can help you in transforming potential brownfield sites within your community. Can everybody, hopefully everybody can see my slide presentation here. So let's start out with what is a brownfield. When you think of a brownfield site, the first thought you might have is that it's a rundown gas station or an abandoned factory or even a dry cleaner. To be considered a brownfield, the property doesn't need to be the ultimate environmental nightmare. The truth is brownfields can be anywhere and everywhere. This slide states EPA's definition of a brownfield.
Hey,
Basically,
Dawn,
yeah.
we can't see I can't see your presentation.
Oh, so sorry. Okay. Let me go back to the Zoom.
Here we go.
Is it full screen now? So sorry.
Yep, great.
Okay, great. Well, now that makes more sense because now I couldn't see you before on my screen, but now I can see you as well. So, all right. So on this slide, you'll see I have EPA's definition of what a brownfield is. To sum it up, basically a brownfield is a site that is underutilized because of its current condition. Often it is the perception of contamination that keeps the property from being redeveloped, not the actual presence of any contamination. If you remove the stigma about the site can be returned to productive reuse. So why the concern about brownfields? There can be a push in communities to build new rather than mess with a potential contaminated site. However, if we don't preserve what is in our community, it can have a great consequence. When working on city plans for the future, keep in mind brownfield sites. Most sites have very little contamination and may be easily cleaned up, moving the site back into productive reuse. The benefits of community identifying the brownfield sites and prioritizing within its comprehensive plan or redevelopment efforts include increasing not only the property value, but the tax base, utilizing the existing infrastructure, mitigating public health and safety concerns, and improving the community image. So how can ECIA help your community regarding brownfield sites? ECIA in 2016 formed a coalition with Clinton and Jackson County and applied for a U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Brownfields Assessment Grant. EPA awarded the coalition a grant in the amount of $550,000 to be used on environmental assessments of potentially contaminated properties located in the 5 counties of Cedar, Clinton, Dubuque, Delaware, and Jackson County. With these grant funds, we were able to complete a total of 57 assessments for $383,622. These assessments were conducted over 26 sites located in 10 communities throughout the region. The prior slide that I had up actually showed 5 of the 26 sites where brownfield assessment funds were utilized. If you want to learn more about each of the sites that we funded under the prior grant, you can check out ECIA's Brownfields Milestone website page located at www.ecia.org, brownfields, and then there's a milestone tab located on that website. The assessment grant closed in 2020. And then seeing the tremendous impact that the grant had on transforming the sites, ECIA once again partnered with Clinton, Jackson, and now Delaware County to apply for a new assessment grant. EPA awarded the coalition a $600,000 grant this year. This grant can be used not only in Clinton, Jackson, and Delaware County, but also in Cedar and Dubuque County. What's great about this new grant is that it includes dollars for environmental assessments and for planning activities. ECIA also administers a revolving loan fund program to aid in the actual cleanup of contaminated sites. How do these two grant programs work? On the assessment grant, the applicant may be a government entity or a nonprofit organization. For-profits such as a developer are not eligible for funds. If your community has a site with perceived contamination and a potential developer is interested in the site, or the city would like to demolish the buildings on the site and turn the property into green space, but doesn't want to proceed without knowing if there's actual contaminants, the city or a nonprofit, such as a local economic development authority, may request brownfield services from ECIA simply by completing an application form. The form is located on the ECIA Brownfields website under the Request tab. It is also something that I can email to everybody after the presentation. The funds are 100% grant funds. There's no match requirement for the community. The applicant does not need to own the site. However, the current property owner does have to be willing to let the environmental consultant have access to the property. Funds that you can receive will cover 100% of the following activities: a phase 1, a phase 2, asbestos and lead inspection and planning. So touching on what Jen wrote about, or Jen Wright said in regards to the Derelict building, if you had a project and you were needing a phase 1, phase 2, maybe before you got too far into purchasing the property or too far into the grant process, this would be a great opportunity to utilize ECIA's program for your phase 1 and phase 2, and then partner with us for that, and then work on your Derelict building grant. So why do a phase 1? Well, as Jen indicated, a phase 1 helps identify any liability by doing it. And it's something that you'd want to do prior to taking ownership to the property in order to ensure that you're protected. You don't have any inherent circle liability or risk. So a phase 1 does have a shelf life. It is considered stale after 6 months. By using the grant funds, you can save about $3,500 to $5,000 for a phase 1, depending on the complexity of the property. A phase 1 basically tells the history of the property and whether or not there might be potential contaminants, and then gives a recommendation of if any additional environmental study needs to be conducted. The phase 2 actually includes testing and sampling of the site. Once a phase 2 is completed and a no further action is found, it can be a green light for developers to move ahead with purchasing and developing a site. A phase 1 may also indicate that there might be asbestos and lead on the property. So another thing that you can use the Brownfields grant funds for is an asbestos and lead inspection. An asbestos inspection would be needed if you're planning to demolish the property. A lead inspection would not be needed unless you're planning just to renovate the property. Great feature of this new grant that we have is that it includes also planning activity dollars. So if you had a site and you weren't 100% sure what you wanted to see done with the site, but you knew the community needed housing for example, you could use funds to have some planning activity completed, such as a site reuse assessment or vision plan to determine how the site could potentially look once it's redeveloped. And what's great about the planning act dollars is that you can get a lot of community involvement and input into the project and feedback. So beyond the assessment grant funds that we also have a Brownfields revolving loan fund. After a site has been assessed, the next step is potentially cleaning up the site if contaminants were found. In addition to the Iowa DNR Derelict Building Program, ECIA administers the ECIA Brownfields Revolving Loan Fund. This is a loan, but government entities or nonprofits could have a portion of the loan funds in the form of a grant. The amount of the loan, minimum amount of the loan is $25,000, and there is no maximum amount of the loan. The program requires match cost funds of 30% for a for-profit entity and 20% for all other applicants. Unlike the assessment program, the loan portion of this program is open for for-profits. Interest rate on the loan is 0% for the first 3 years, and then it's tiered after that for the remainder of the term. So I kind of discussed the two programs that we offer. We offer this, like I said, the assessment program and also the revolving loan fund program. I thought it'd be great to share with you some of examples of achievements that we had with our prior assessment grant funds. So I have here pictured the former meat locker in Ryan, Iowa. And you'll see on the left the condition of the building prior to receiving funds. We actually provided a funding to do a phase 1 assessment of the property. The assessment did determine that there was asbestos and lead contamination. Because the property, the community was planning on demolishing the property, there was no need to do anything further as far as the lead. However, the asbestos needed to be abated. So the city of Ryan acquired the site, they abated the asbestos and then demolished the building with funding from the Iowa DNR Derelict Building Grant Program. Afterwards, an environmental consultant inspected the site and deemed it to be ready for reuse and redevelopment. The city then obtained a grant from Future Foundation of Delaware to create a corner street park pavilion for use as a pocket neighborhood and community gathering space for the community. New sidewalks were installed along with bike rack, 3 picnic tables, and a pavilion and bus stop. This redevelopment project was completed this summer. The next example that I have is the Dyersville gasoline factory. Initially, this was the gasoline factory in downtown Dyersville, and later it became a car garage and then a 4-car showroom. In 1910, it was turned into a sewing factory, making primarily pajamas. In recent years, the building sat vacant. In 2018, the city received a $100,000 Iowa Economic Development Community Catalyst Grant to assist in the renovation of the building. The city also provided a cash match for that. ECIA was able to use its US EPA Brownfields Assessment Grant to fund a phase 1 environmental assessment on the property, along with a lead-based paint and asbestos inspection. The lead-based paint inspection indicated the levels of of lead were low, so no abatement was necessary, but practice of safe work practices were recommended. The asbestos inspection results recommended abatement, and it was performed prior to renovation of the facility. The Iowa DNR Brownfields Program provided 50% match funding for the cost of removal of the asbestos. The property was then sold to the current owners, known as Textile Real Estate, and they redeveloped the site into the brewery pub that it is now today. And the pub opened in July of 2019. If you're familiar with Dyersville, this was one of actually 6 properties that's in the Dyersville downtown area. And the other properties were kind of surrounding this site. They were all demolished, and the city of Dyersville, that's where they are currently in the process of developing the landing, which is multi-story mixed-use property that contains commercial and residential units. So if you'd like to see how your project could be added to ECIA's Brownfield Coalition milestones and success stories, the next screen here identifies steps that you can take to transform potential brownfield sites into the next pride and joy of your community. The first step is identifying the properties. Here at ECIA, we maintain a list of sites of interest located throughout the region. If you're curious of whether a site in your community is on the list, you can actually pull up a map on our ECIA website, Brownfields website, that will show all the sites that we have listed. If you'd like us to keep a site on our radar and add to our list, please let me know. Once sites are identified, the remaining steps that I have outlined here can be interchanged. They don't need to be done in this order specifically, but are guide to steps you can take regarding the site. The key to a successful project is obtaining community buy-in of the project early on. Nothing can kill an idea faster than a community that doesn't feel that they had a say in the project and have a negative view of the project. Early support of the project from key community stakeholders may open the door to additional funding sources and additional redevelopment ideas that would serve the community needs. Once you have the community support, let your vision drive your project. Create a briefing sheet to highlight your project. If others can see your vision, they may be moved to support it. Lastly, celebrate your success. This can help lift up a community, help spark ideas for new projects, and build passion within the community to rebuild other sites. If you'd be interested in utilizing any of ECIA's Brownfield services, please contact me. We're in the process of procuring environmental consultants for the new assessment grant that we were awarded this summer. And we plan to have funds available starting in February. Just a quick note of thank you to program sponsors, EPA, who sponsors and has the funds for both the Brownfields Assessment Grant and the RLF. DNR, I work closely with Mel Pins at the DNR. He is wonderful in just giving guidance of how to get a project started. You can reach out to him at any time. He'll tell you what you need to do, what you don't need to do, what you need, kind of the first steps. So it's great. And then he has funding available as well to assist. He has an Iowa Brownfields program that we've used a lot in the past along with our funds. And then the last partner that I have listed here is KSU TAB for technical assistance. And they're a great partner as well to kind of bounce ideas off of as far as potential brownfield sites. They've helped us in creating vision plans for communities. Most recently, we worked with them in the city of Macokota to create a vision plan for the old, soon to be old Macokota, Jackson County Regional Health Center. So their services are free. So it's always nice to take advantage of anything like that. That's a free service. So I also wanted to list our partners or our coalition members for the two grants, our assessment grant. Clinton, Delaware, and Jackson County partnered with us in writing the grant, applying for it. And for the revolving loan fund, as you can see, all 5 counties plus several cities assisted in us in applying for that revolving loan fund. As I indicated earlier in the presentation, any community within our 5 county region is eligible for the funding. So with that, does anyone have any questions?
Crickets, Dawn. Well, can I just say that Dawn was hired for a completely different job, and she has taken on this program and has done great with it. So thank you, Dawn, for the great work that you do, and thank you for this wonderful information.
You're welcome. If anybody has any questions or wants to know more about the services, please contact me. My contact information was there on that last screen. Hopefully you got it. Otherwise, my email is ddanielson@ECIA. Like I said, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd love to hear about your project in your community.
Don, I just wanted to ask, just because a lot of people probably aren't familiar with brownfields, but
Yeah.
some are, I realize, but the timing of like your phase 1, you know, it has to, you know, your project has to happen within so many days of your phase 1. Is that correct?
So a phase 1, it's nice to have a phase 1 completed prior to the purchase, the acquisition of the site. There are occasions when the city may take possession of a site involuntarily. And in those scenarios, then you wouldn't necessarily have a phase 1 prior to, depending on the timing of everything. And that'd be okay. You can still get a phase 1 after you acquire it. So like if you did a foreclosure for tax sale or something like that, or a nuisance abatement under the Iowa Chapter 657A, if you acquired the property, you can get a phase 1 afterwards. But otherwise, if you're voluntarily purchasing the property, even if it's a donation from current property owner to the city, it's good to have that phase 1 done prior to the transfer of ownership and within 6 months in order for it to not be considered stale.
Okay. And keep in mind also with the funding, they want you to have like a plan in place. It's not like, oh, this building needs to have something done, but what is it? They want you to have a plan, correct? Like this is going to be a multi-use, you know, building with retail and apartments on top, whatever. I mean, they want you to have a plan in place, correct?
Well, it doesn't have to be 100% in place. You can utilize planning dollars for the planning activities to kind of help come up with a vision. But you kind of have to know along the lines of what you like to see for reuse as far as the site goes. Obviously, we don't want to do a phase 1 because, again, it's only good for 6 months. So you don't want to do a phase 1 and then the property just sits there and nothing happens to it. So to have an idea of, hey, we wanted to do a phase 1 because we want to find out if there's any contaminants, because we want to maybe put out an RFP for a developer to come in and renovate this for residential use. To kind of have some kind of idea, it's beneficial.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? No? Okay. Well, Marla, do you think we should take like a 10-15-minute break?
Yeah, I was just seeing if our next speaker was on, and he's not. So yeah, about a 15-minute break. Email
So you
break.
want to head back at like 9:50? Is that good?
Sure.
Okay.
We'll see you then. Thanks, guys. So everyone, our next presenter is Jim Engle, and he is from the Iowa Downtown Resource Center at the Iowa Economic Development Authority. And he's just going to talk about, you know, what downtown planning resources are available for communities to transform their downtowns. So Jim, take it away.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to say it's good to be here, even though I'm not really here. It's one of those weird presentations we're doing virtually again, but we're kind of making do. We've the Iowa Downtown Resource Center. It's been a challenging year because a lot of our work is getting out in the communities and shaking hands and meeting people and selling our programs and that kind of thing. But we're doing okay, and I hope you're all doing okay too. But yeah, I want to talk today about the Downtown Resource Center, and I think what I'm going to do today. First of all, I just want to say we're thankful that we've got a state agency that values downtowns as part of economic development, and the Iowa Economic Development Authority really does view downtown as a symbol of economic health in our state and in our communities too. But what I want to do today, I'm going to do this kind of in a 2 segments. But I want to talk about the Iowa Downtown Resource Center, and I'm specifically going to talk about 10 things that I think could help your communities. And I'm sure you're familiar with some of these, maybe some not so much as the others. But then I also want to talk about some common challenges we see in downtowns right now, and how myself and my staff are trying to work with communities to attack those challenges. I'm going to save the Iowa Downtown Resource Center for the second half of my presentation, but the first 2 things on that list there, downtown assessment visits and walkarounds, I'll discuss in a second, but this is really kind of where we get our data. We have a staff of 9 people here, and we're actively engaged in communities in the state of Iowa of all sizes, doing assessment visits and walkarounds. So we get to see a lot of communities, we get to talk to a lot of community leaders and mayors and city clerks and sometimes economic development people. And it's easy for us to spot trends in the towns. And some of the towns are doing quite well with their downtowns, others it's a real challenge. But through the assessments and walkarounds, I listed 10 things today that commonly come up when we're in the communities. And I just want to go through those 10 to start off. But one thing I do want to say, these 10 things kind of vary depending on community size. Sometimes the issues are the same, but sometimes the solutions are much different depending on if you're a community of 300 people or a community of 15,000 people. But the first thing on my Jim's top 10 list of things you just got to do in your downtowns, one thing that we often see, and I don't know the size of all your communities present today, but one thing that we often see are communities that don't have any kind of structure other than perhaps city government. And it really makes it difficult to get a lot of things done if you don't have a volunteer base that is plugged in some way into a chamber of commerce or a betterment organization or some kind of an action team that makes things happen in your downtown area. And quite often when I'm in a community of 500 people, 700 people, maybe even less, I will try just to get that community to scale down and maybe come up with 5 things that they can accomplish in a year. And maybe the first thing is a big one, one that you probably won't get done in a year. Maybe it's just an idea, but something that you can work on in the future. Maybe the second and third things are kind of medium-sized projects, and then some low-hanging fruit kind of projects that you can do right away too. And then after a year, kind of reassess those things and knock them off your schedule and come up with a new list. But structure, we have found, is really important. It's hard to have successes with kind of a loosey-goosey arrangement. Okay. The second thing that we always see, especially when we're doing these downtown assessments or walkarounds in the growing seasons, are this kind of thing, clean and neat. And this is something that's pretty easy to take care of for communities. But we see a lot of communities that just aren't that inviting or welcoming because they've kind of let things go with weeds. They've maybe had a streetscape project 10 years ago and the trees are all broken off now, that kind of thing. So this is kind of an easy place to start. We make communities mad all the time because we go in and tell them to pull their weeds. Seems like a really simple thing, but not something that all communities take care of. Third on the list of things that we think are musts, and this can be done no matter what your population is. I think one of the strengths of living in a larger town is you got a lot more things to do. I grew up in a town that's about 1,900 people now, And I remember that was always a challenge, you know, and I kind of remember the good old days where you went uptown or downtown to the, you know, the Sweet Corn Festival or the parade or that kind of thing. And people look forward to those quality of life kind of events. We work in some small towns that don't do events. And it's one of the first things we look at. And I think sometimes City Hall or community leaders see those as fluffy kinds of activities, but it really does impact quality of life for people in your community if you can line up things that they can look forward to, whether they be farmers markets, you know, or a parade or some kind of a festival. What we found lately in the smaller towns is instead of doing one big festival a year, to maybe do five or six smaller events that you bring 100 people out to. But scheduling events is just crucial for small town success. And we like to see those in downtown areas, of course, to create the downtown as the hub of activity. Okay. And then I'm going to talk about some of the harder ones now. Downtown buildings are tough. Yeah, especially if you're in a small town and you've seen years and years of deterioration. And it's tough to talk about because you may have 15 buildings in your downtown and 13 of them are in bad shape. And we always talk to communities about a one-by-one approach, and there's really no magic bullet on getting something done. But if you really think about it, your downtown area, it really is the buildings that kind of define the downtown area. So we're constantly trying to work with small communities and larger ones in starting small, maybe doing some low-hanging fruits and paint projects, that kind of thing first. But then in a little bit, I'm going to tell you about a grant program or two that you probably may have heard of, and some of you may have already applied for these programs. But even in smaller communities, we've had some success with restoration projects. This is a project in Central City, Iowa. This happens to be one of the smaller Main Street cities that we have, but it was an old Gamble store that they were about ready to tear down. And surprisingly, this was not a big ticket kind of a restoration. This is kind of a funny project because this was a building owner that
They let me in.
expect
Is it really actually?
a project like this. But lo and behold, someone just asked him. You know, sometimes that's just the first step. Don't be afraid of people, just ask them. They had a little bit of incentive money involved in this, but it turned into just a nice small project that removed an eyesore in downtown Central City. I'm sorry, I'm late. I'm late with the aftershot here. And then number 5 on my list of 10 things, I mentioned buildings as being hard. This might be even harder. But what we're finding in our communities in the state are the ones that are really popping in their downtown areas are actually having people live in their downtowns. And when I say that, please don't go back and say, Jim told us to put housing in our storefronts. We don't like that. Oftentimes that's a sign of failure for communities, is when you start having people living in the downtown storefronts, the lower storefronts. It's kind of an intimidation factor for pedestrians and shoppers if there's lawn furniture sitting out in front of the building, or people making that their homes. But we love it when people move into upper stories of downtown buildings. The hot downtowns are doing downtown housing in the upper floors. So a lot of our programs, we're starting to gear towards getting people living in those apartments. Some communities we're in have downtown housing in the upper stories, but it's not always quality housing in the downtown. The rents tend to be low. So we're trying to implement projects and programs to get more people living downtown. For one thing, it just brings more vitality to the district, and you have a whole new market of people that are living there and creating traffic and using the restaurants and using the service and retail businesses also. So, and then finally, in some situations, it really does help property owners to cash flow their buildings. When we do our grant programs, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, it's oftentimes the hardest thing to do is to rent the lower storefront to a business. But oftentimes you can get revenue going by renting the upper floors in the form of housing. And I'm very surprised, but some of our smallest towns are getting $800-900 a month rent for an apartment in their downtown area because the housing crunch is so bad right now. And communities don't have housing for a new teacher, for example, that moves to the community. So we're really interested in doing downtown housing. I probably shouldn't have showed this photo on the right because it's sort of an extreme. This is in Oskaloosa, Iowa, which is a community of about 11,000 people. But this is above the Brown Shoe Fit building. It is an apartment in the second floor of that structure. And again, it's kind of an extreme. This is one apartment in the entire second floor. So in most cases, when we do a grant, we could have got 4 apartments out of that. But it's very, very cool. And then one of the other issues we see, and I think communities tend to take this for granted, is it's not always that easy to find your downtown. There are usually signage problems, but we would love to see communities with some kind of directional signs that actually direct people to their downtown. Now, I understand there are some communities, it's the cart before the horse. I understand there are some communities where you don't really have that much of a downtown anymore. So, you know, you're thinking, well, why should we put a green sign out directing someone to our historic downtown? And I get that. But if you do have a business core, if you do have something to bring people to, I would advocate something on the main thoroughfare that directs people there. And then when you get there, we have seen communities doing these kind of sense of place projects where they'll do a gateway. You see the brick structure in Olwine. You see the arch. I'm not sure. I think that might be Valley Junction in Des Moines. I'm not sure. But we've seen small towns do this too. And then Belle Plaine. You know, what's more Belle Plaine than the silo as you come into town? But something just to welcome you and to make sure people understand they've arrived somewhere, we think is very important. And then 7 on my list, I don't know if we've ever done a downtown walk around or an assessment without talking about the streetscape experience. And again, granted, I understand this is a little bit more difficult in the small towns. However, you can do flowers, you can fix up windows, that kind of thing, just to make the pedestrian experience more interesting for people. Window displays, outdoor seating at restaurants, things like that, flowers, public art. Oftentimes you've got local talent in your community that kind of can help come up with ideas for this kind of project. But it's always a good idea. One of the things we see a lot in downtowns now too that have a business core, if you've got businesses that have been there for a long time and their advertising is just kind of turned into maybe word of mouth kind of thing, I think they sometimes take for granted that people that don't know your downtown don't know what's inside. So we see some beautiful stores and businesses, but they sometimes are the kinds of stores you wouldn't have walked in if you were outside of the store. They haven't put enough attention into their display or their facade itself. So that streetscape experience is something we like to see communities start with too. And we always encourage communities. You know, I think this is a dumb idea, but we think it's important. We always encourage communities when they start and they have some kind of a leadership team, just to take a walk, just get them down there and take a walk, maybe even give them cameras, take some pictures, and maybe look for some red flags. You know, you walk through this downtown every day, and I think sometimes you take that kind of stuff for granted. But if you can come up with a kind of a to-do list in your downtown, it's a good idea. And oftentimes, again, it's low-hanging fruit. Number 8 on our list of must-dos, and maybe after you take a walk, you can think about this. but just do something unique that's eye-catching downtown. Maybe you've got local art talent. Now you see the picture in the middle, the farmer with the peanuts. That's kind of a big project. That probably cost $100,000 to paint on their silos. But if you look at the projects on the left, for example, just little things like that add some attention to your downtown, that gets people walking around, is really a good idea. The funny one is the one in the lower right-hand corner. This is actually in Dysart, Iowa, and they have a local artist that paints. I'm not sure what you call this, but it kind of looks like your car is going to drive into a big hole. Some people like this, some people don't. But she's started to do other projects in downtown Dysart like this. But think about creative things like that. And then number 9, again, whether you're a big town or a small town, we just did a small town survey, and the number 1 need that small towns say they have is to put businesses in buildings. There's got to be feasibility for that, of course, but getting proactive with businesses is really important. If you're in a community that doesn't have a local organization, a betterment group or a chamber of commerce or a Main Street program or something like that, chances are there's not a lot of contact going on with the downtown businesses that you have. And we think it's crucial to start that contact. One of the number 1 problems we see around the state right now are aging business owners that are getting up there in the 60-year-old neighborhood. And there's this worry that someday they're all going to close at once, which is going to leave some towns in a real fix. So we highly encourage communication with the businesses, kind of looking for red flags and signs of business closings, that kind of thing, talking to them about how you can help them. If you've got vacancies, cleaning those vacant windows up and maybe putting something in the window that says, can you imagine this is a bakery or a candy store or whatever you think your local need is, instead of just a realtor sign, which hope I don't have any realtors in the crowd today. They're not always that attractive, but work with your realtors and your property owners on something like that. It's kind of a passive business recruitment idea. Okay, and then number 10, and I'm going to nag a little bit here because we have a group of cities in the state, and they're all sizes, that contact us all the time. They come to our workshops, they get on our website, they know our grants, they call with questions, and I got to tell you, it is oftentimes those communities that we see getting things done, and they get grant money, and they're doing good projects. So we like to see communities that aren't engaged with us and other programs around the state, just to get connected, get in the loop, attend our conferences, get your events listed with the Division of Tourism, get real familiar with our grant opportunities, because I don't think we've ever had a time period where we've had more offerings for grants as right now. But then we also like to see communities that engage more with their neighboring communities. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of things we do to try to motivate that engagement. But if you got a town that's next door that's doing really well, they're usually flattered by your call. So feel free, to get in the van and line up a tour to some of those other communities and just get some ideas on what they do. And then utilize the Iowa Downtown Resource Center services that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. And then I said 10, I lied. I threw one more in here. One of the things that we see as a problem in a lot of our downtowns and communities are signage issues. And oftentimes it's public signage. Oftentimes it's a lack of signage, so you can't find things. Oftentimes it's signage that has not been redone in 50 years. We see businesses that have been closed for 30 years where the sign is still attached to the building. So you've got obsolete signage. And we see that in a lot of smaller communities where perhaps there isn't as much business turnover. And we always tell those communities, this is an easy one. This is one of your low hanging fruit. Get the sign off the building if it's not there, because it just sends a bad message when you've got visitors in town. But then with building owners too, or business owners, excuse me, you'll often have them trying to outshout each other, you know, with great big signs that cover up half of their facade, so it's not on the signboard that where a sign was meant to be. But take a look at your downtown signage. I've even seen communities put together small signage grant programs. If they've got a local sign maker, perhaps they work with him or her on getting that done. One thing I forgot to mention with the housing, this isn't a housing project, but oftentimes when you look at buildings in the downtown, you see boarded up windows. Esterville, Iowa has a really cool program where they actually give a small grant out for removal of the boards. They give a grant to open up downtown windows to make the downtown more inviting. So those are my 11 things that we see that I think that communities should sit down and take a look at, and just kind of audit your downtown area and talk about how good you are in some of those and maybe some of the challenges you have in other areas. I want to tell you a little bit more about what we do now in our services. And some of you have probably taken advantage of these. Some of them are free. Some of them have a fee. We don't have cash cows. We don't make money off services. Sometimes, for example, at the downtown assessment here, you see that fee is $2,500 for a 2-day visit. It's actually a 3-day visit now. We hire a consultant and pay him $6,000. It's part of the team. So we're not real good deal makers, I guess, because we lose a lot of money on those visits, but we want to do them. But one of the services the Iowa Downtown Resource Center offers is a downtown assessment visit. And we bring in either 4 to 5 people to your community for 3 days. And we do a pre-visit survey that communities email blast out. We usually hope to get at least 100 surveys back. It's nothing scientific, but what it does do is it helps our team understand what your issues, what might be controversial in town, what people think locally. That's important to us. And then we use that to ask the right questions when we're on site. And it's kind of a starting point for us to understand the strengths and the challenges communities have on the assessment. And then while we are on site, we do a walking tour, a driving tour. We meet with the key groups or organizations in town. And then we do a whole bunch of interviews with people that live in the community, and we try to theme those. We might meet with a group of realtors, a group of retailers, a group of ornery retailers, a group of bankers, students, all kinds of different people, so we can get their perspectives on the downtown. And then we also have a community meeting for people to come by. And then at the end of the visit, the team puts together a presentation that's just loaded with, well, first of all, loaded with praise for all the cool things that your town's done. But then we're very honest about the challenges that we see just based on our experience too. So I will be the first to admit we've left town before and that town has been angry with us, but then that town usually goes to work. So that's okay. We're happy. We're happy if we annoy some people, if then they start attacking some of the problems that the town has. We follow up a public presentation with a report that's in fact, I'm working on one right now for Osage, Iowa. That's usually about 40 pages long, and it's full of recommendations and photos and actually drawings. We bring with us on the downtown assessment team a gentleman that is an old school hand drawer. So we'll come up with recommendations, and then Dennis will actually put those on paper. So people love visual things, so they can see what we're recommending. And we charge $2,500 for a 3-day downtown assessment visit. But it's been a good a good service. We usually do about 7 of these a year, give or take 2 or 3. COVID kind of slammed us down on these. We had 3 scheduled this year. No, we had 4 scheduled this year. All 4 were postponed. We actually did complete 3 of them. And we went through all the safety measures. So we required masks and we social distance meetings. We didn't do the presentation. We taped it and sent it to the communities. And it still worked out pretty good. But we are so hoping that we can get back to normal downtown assessments in the coming year. But again, a very good visit that communities have used the report as I said, as kind of a mini plan for the future. Usually communities that ask for a downtown assessment are a little larger. I think the smallest community we did a downtown assessment in was about 900 people. Princeton, if you know where that is, at, south of the Quad Cities. But usually the downtown assessment towns are a little larger. I'm sorry, here's an example of some images from a report. So we did one in Decorah. That's kind of an example of some of the drawings and images that were done that accompanied the report. And I was just going to say, the smaller towns certainly can do a downtown assessment, but oftentimes they will sign up for a downtown walk around. And this is a visit that costs $300, and it consists of 2 staff members from our office. It does not come with the extensive report. At the end of the visit, we do kind of a 2-page summary for the community. But we do a 2-hour downtown tour. If you're in a really small town, you're going to say, wow, you're going to walk our downtown for 2 hours. Believe it or not, we can do it. We typically spend a part of the tour with the group of community leaders. We always start off with a short meeting just so we can understand the issues. And then we do a tour. We usually divide that tour up with community leaders, and then our 2-person team usually does the half of the tour without them. And we'll walk in and out of businesses and talk to people. We'll go look at the alleys. We usually have someone that's skilled in design, so they'll look at some of your design elements and your buildings and your alleys and your signage and that kind of thing. And then we come back and do a kind of a 1-hour summary. So it's what I would call a mini downtown assessment, much less expensive. We typically do 10 to 15 of these a year. I would highly recommend it. Good visit to get you started and give you some things to talk about. And this is an example of a summary from a downtown walk around. This one happens to be in Hopkinton, Iowa. You know, what's really cool about the assessments and walkarounds too, is we have seen a way greater percentage of communities apply for grant programs after we do one. And that's probably in essence our fault, because perhaps our assessment or walkaround was the first exposure that communities had to our grant programs, which probably says we need to do a better job of marketing those. But I think we've done a good job of establishing relationships with communities with those kinds of visits also. We're looking for towns that are willing to kind of open themselves up and show us their good things and their bad things in town. And then we go to work on it. Before I mention the downtown exchange, I want to mention one other service that we've done too that we don't market a lot. It's not on our website, but it's kind of like the downtown walk around process. We have actually done 3 county-wide downtown assessments. One was in Clinton County, one was in Sac County, and one was in Pocahontas County. And I say they're similar to the downtown walkarounds because we have a large, we spend about that much time in each town. But for example, when we were in Sac County, there were probably 10 communities that wanted to participate in that 3-day service. Now that's kind of hard to pull off. So we have a team of 5 people. It also includes the guy on our team that does the drawings. And we, in the towns that had a little bit more downtown area, a little bit more structure. For example, they had a committee, for example. We would have a meeting, we would walk the downtown, and we'd get out of town. Some of the very small towns, we do a drive-through. We just do a drive-through and not talk to people. But then we handled it much in the same way as we did the downtown assessment, is after we were done, we put our heads together and we came up with downtown walk around like ideas for those communities, with maybe 1 or 2 drawings for each of the towns that we worked in. And then we presented that all back at the end of the visit to all of the towns in the county. So when we were in Sac County, Sac City had to listen to the Lakeview recommendations too, but it was kind of fun. You kind of got people knowing each other in the towns in the county. Most of them were very small towns we worked in also, but it was a pretty good visit. We also followed that up with a pretty major written report. So that's something you can consider. If you ask me how much that costs, I'm going to tell you I don't know right now. It's one where we typically put more resources in. It might be a little bit more than that 2,500, but not much more. But if you're interested in that, it's a good idea to talk to some counties. I'm working with one right now on doing a county-wide assessment. So the Downtown Exchange, this is another program that we do not do every year. However, if somebody came to us and wanted us to do this, we would. And let me just say, you can call us anytime. I'm kind of telling you about prescripted services we have here, but if some town wants us to come and talk to them about their downtown, we're always willing to make a trip. But with the Downtown Exchange, this is kind of an unusual visit because we pair up communities that are like size and that are, I would say, at least an hour apart from each other. We don't want town A traveling 300 miles to town B, but we don't want them to know town B that well either. But it's kind of like that downtown walk around, only it's not us doing it. It's it's your colleague town. So we pair 2 towns up. I'll give you an example. We worked with Keota, which is in Keokuk County, and Ely, which is in maybe Lynn. I'm not sure about that. But very similar size communities, very different communities, because Ely is sort of a suburb of Cedar Rapids. Keota is kind of a rural town with not a lot of other bigger cities around. But they would send 6 to 10 people. They'd have fun. They'd make a day of it, and we'd give them a kind of a checklist. Take a look at the community entrances, eat at a restaurant, tell us about the service, talk about the cleanliness of the downtown, talk about the business mix. And then they filled out a survey. And then instead of that community going and presenting the results back, my staff did that. And that has been a free service over the years. So we would be more than happy to pair towns up and do something like that. I'm thinking when COVID's over, we'll probably do something a little bit more official and actually have a round of those kinds of visits again, but kind of a fun visit. The one thing that doesn't work about that visit is we kind of feel like towns are too nice to each other. They're Iowa nice. When community A visits community B, they typically don't go on attack mode. They'll be very nice about it. My staff is a little bit more honest, which is I think what communities are looking for is honesty. Each year we do the Iowa Downtown Conference. As you might expect, this has been messed with in a major way by our pandemic. So last year it was scheduled in Iowa City. It was canceled. This year it's also scheduled in Iowa City for July 26th to 28th. Who knows what that will bring? If we do not do the conference, we're going to make a bigger deal out of a virtual conference. And I know people are getting tired of that, but we're going to do it. We actually did kind of a mini one last year virtually after it was called off, but we're hoping to get people together for that. It's a really good conference. We have all kinds of different tracks going. It's for big towns, it's for small towns. It's a good way to network with people. So stay tuned on that. Keep in touch with us on our website. And then every year, again, crazy year. We didn't do this during pandemic year either, but we do downtown forums. We found these to be really good visits. And this is an opportunity for communities in the same area to network with each other, kind of like you're doing right now. Sometimes we don't see communities talking to their neighbors that often. So this is a great way to do that. And we kind of have a different theme for this every time we do it. We typically do 4 of these in the state each year. So we do them regionally. And we always do it based on some downtown revitalization topic, like downtown design or downtown business mix development or something like that. So stay tuned on this too. We're going to do something. We're hoping we can do it in person. And then I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, the Community Development Block Grant Program. I'm originally an Iowan, but I moved away to Wisconsin for 23 years and I managed a Main Street program there. So when I took this job, every weekend I was driving back from Iowa to Wisconsin to be with my family for a couple of months. And when I was driving to Iowa, I kept seeing all of this scaffolding up on downtown buildings. And I'm talking about 6, 7, 8 downtown buildings, not just one downtown building. And I wondered what the heck was going on, because you typically don't see that kind of investment that fast in a downtown. And this is why. It's because of we call it the CDBG Block Grant Fund, the Downtown Revitalization Fund. But this is a grant program where, again, I'm not going to talk a lot about this because I'm not an expert. I try to sell this around the state because I think it's a good program. I don't know any other state in the United States that does anything quite like this. But it's a program where you can get up to $500,000, depending on your community size, to do a number of facade projects in your downtown area. So each year, I'm hesitant to talk because each year the staff of this program changes the criterion a little bit on the number of buildings that qualify. But it's been a really good program. I'm not going to say it's a downside, but it's a federal program. So a lot of federal paperwork exists. You've got to abide by Davis-Bacon wage rates. There's quite a lot of paperwork associated with HUD that you have to do for this project. But we have seen some communities just totally turn around their programs. I've got some old dates on here. I apologize for that. I think the new grant winners were just announced for this program. But here's an example of Belle Plaine, population 2,500 people. And they did just a number of facades with this program a few years ago. Total project cost was $4.1 million. And many of these communities, the property owner certainly has to contribute to their building. But if you've got us paying for half of the project and the city paying for a part of the project, the building owner's commitment might be only 1/4 of the project. So it's been a very good program through the years. This is one, you can see the kind of the stark Belle Plaine streetscape prior and then after. But these are the kinds of projects that are done. This is the guy, if you're interested in the program. Ed Bosch is not in my bureau, but he's in our division, and he works on the application process and the awards and monitoring the projects. So if you're interested in the downtown revitalization program, give Ed a call. His contact information is here. Good guy. Ed will visit your community. He'll give you advice. And then again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Main Street either. Main Street program actually preceded the Iowa Downtown Resource Center, which is kind of weird because the Resource Center is the umbrella organization now. But Main Street is still our premier program. If a community is all in, They'll apply for Main Street if they want to do something in their downtown. It's a very good program. I'm still a believer we have the best Main Street program in the nation. But our goal is to help communities set up an organization that works specifically in the downtown area. It's typically for cities that have a little bit of population base. It's hard for a really tiny town, perhaps, to set up a new organization and hire a part-time staff person. But it's been a good program. It's based on the 4-point approach that was adopted by the National Main Street Center. So all of our Main Street communities have an organization with an executive director, and then they have a 4-committee structure. So the director is hired in small towns under 5,000. They can hire a part-time manager. In larger towns, they hire a full-time one. We have 55 Main Street programs in the state right now. I think the smallest Main Street program has 999 people in it. And then we work in bigger cities like Waterloo, Marshalltown, Ames, and some business districts in larger cities like Davenport and Des Moines. But it's a comprehensive downtown economic revitalization program that uses preservation as one of its most important tools. And we basically flood Main Street communities with resources and services. So the organization committee is the group that sets up volunteer development, fundraising, communications. Main Street communities have promotion committees that do those events that I was talking about before, sometimes image campaigns, sometimes retail events. And then we have design committees in our Main Street towns that work on building rehabs, public improvements, anything visual and functional in the downtown. And this is just an example. You know, most of our downtown buildings were built with the ground floor, usually a kick plate at the bottom, open windows, you got an upper storefront, and then you have a cornice at the top of the building. And then what happens through the years is this: you get business owners that mess up that flow of the building. So they'll put a big signboard. Usually the trouble starts on the storefront when businesses change. You get professional offices or bars or other types of businesses that don't need the window display. So they take all the visibility out of the window. And then we try to bring that back. So design committees and Main Street programs do that. And then the fourth component of the Main Street is economic restructuring or economic vitality. And that's the group that works on real estate development things, business recruitment, business retention. So when I talked earlier about small towns not having structure, this is the other end of the spectrum. This is the extreme, because we help these communities set up organizations with committee structures. And these are the services. I won't run down all these, but these are the kinds of things we offer Main Street communities. We train local directors. We train board members and volunteers. We have a small team of business assistance people that offer consulting services and market analysis assistance to businesses. We have a couple of design people on our staff that actually do facade renderings for building owners and business owners in Main Street communities. We have quarterly workshops. It's just a really solid network of people and Main Street communities. And there are even a couple of grant programs that are only available for Main Street communities. There's a challenge grant, which is a building rehab grant. And then we have something called Open for Business, which is a grant for a business expansion. It's kind of like the TV show Shark Tank, if you've seen that. Okay, now this is one that I want you to be interested in, because this is a newer program. We've had 3 rounds of the Community Catalyst Building Remediation Grant. And when we've had the Main Street Challenge Grant, which is the grant program I mentioned before that is just for Main Street towns, but it's for rehab of downtown buildings. And we had some communities that actually went to my boss, Debbie Durham, and said, hey, what about us? We need a grant program like that. And we put it together. And we have loved this program for 3 years. And I will be the first to admit I was just a little bit skeptical when we started. I've turned directions on that. It's been a really, really good program. It's got a really, really bad name. The Community Catalyst Building Remediation Grant. That was created by some legislators, and we live with it. We try to market this program a lot, but it is a building rehab program, and cities must apply for the program. So, or excuse me, for the grant. However, rarely do we fund a building that's owned by the city. So a city generally applies for a local downtown building owner, and then there's a development agreement between the city and that property owner if they indeed get the grant. Okay, so $100,000 per building rehab. It's a competitive application process, and the word catalyst is the key for this grant program. We want projects that we think will serve as models and domino throughout the downtown area. So that can mean a number of different things. We're most generally interested in buildings that are underutilized. So if you've got a property that's very vacant or partially vacant and it's just not being utilized, that's great. If it's a really cool building, that's even better. You know, a building that just fell into disrepair and it's sitting vacant. So this is a reimbursement program. Communities that are interested in this grant can file a pre-application with us, and it's a very easy pre-application. I think it's only a page and a half, 2 pages long, that just kind of describes your concept and what your early funding base would look like, your early sources of funding. And then if it's something that we think is eligible, we will invite that community to file a full application for the process. And in this very PowerPoint, I'm going to have the dates for you, but the pre-application process is already open. The other thing I want to say is I'm just kind of hitting some highlights of this. About 3 weeks ago, Jim Thompson, who is the administrator of this grant, myself, and another colleague recorded an application workshop. We generally take these around the state and do them in person, but because of COVID, we recorded an application workshop. And there are some advantages of that because you can send it right to your property owners to look at. They don't have to drive somewhere to our application workshop. The disadvantage, they can't ask questions on site, but they can call me or Jim Thompson with questions at any time. Now, one of the cool things about this project is 40% of the funding to communities that we give out every year has to go to communities less than 1,500 people. So when was the last time you remembered a program that was for really small towns? That's really cool, I think. And we have not had any problem meeting that threshold. If we do not have communities under 1,500 that score high enough given a threshold, we can then turn the money over to larger communities. But we've only had to do that. No, I don't think we've ever had to do that. We've always had very good scoring small towns with this program. You look at the building up in the top right there. This is actually the first one that was actually completed. And this is in Stanton, Iowa. Very underutilized property. There was a beauty shop on half of the building. And when they did the work on the lower storefront, she actually moved her business over there and then moved back. It's kind of a complicated process, but they totally opened up this building and then put apartments upstairs. That's a nighttime picture, but you can see how they opened up the storefront. And they received $100,000 to do that. This is not a match program, so there is no required match. However, to be competitive, you really do have to have match. So we like to see skin in the game from the local property owner, but we also require commitment from the city. And cash is always king there, but we allow in-kind contributions from the city. So perhaps they would help clean out the building and get rid of the debris, that kind of thing. We've seen some other creative ways cities have done in-kind contributions. We always recommend that cities do their own little RFP in the community, because you know the political issues you can get in. If someone comes to you and asks you to contribute to a program as a city, you know, that's a political issue. So oftentimes our cities will do a very short RFP, send it out to all the property owners in the downtown, and then pick the project that they think would be the best applicant for the program, based on the building itself, based on the funding letter from the property owner. So then at least everyone has access to the grant program. I would especially do that if the city's putting cash into the program. Okay. All pre-apps and applications are submitted through Iowa Grants. We can talk you through that. And there's the dates for the applications. The pre-apps must be submitted by January 29th, so you've got time on this one. The application deadline isn't until April 16th. And then property owners have 2 years from the award letter to actually complete the project. It is a reimbursement program. So you don't send an app, we approve it, and then we send you $100,000. You can get 2 draws for this program. So you can, midway, I think you can get a draw of 60% of the grant. And then we do a final walkthrough when the project's done and give you the rest of the money, assuming everything was done the way you said it was going to be done in the application. But again, very good. Whoops. I'll show you a couple of projects that we thought worked. Now, I would say 80 to 90% of the Catalyst grants that we have funded have had upper story housing as part of it. In fact, I think a community that has not had much luck with that can really show a catalytic impact if they've got a model housing project in their downtown upstairs. Now, this one I'm going to show you didn't have that. This was an old 1903 building in downtown Dyersville. It was vacant. It was most recently a sewing factory. In fact, don't ask me the details behind this, but this is the sewing factory that was the impetus for the movie and I believe Broadway show, The Pajama Game. I don't know much about it, but it was really about this building. There's a story behind that, but anyway, the factory was gone. This property was right on a connection to a trail extension to the riverfront. It was also a gateway to a planned office and housing development. So the location was perfect. And they had a couple, an entrepreneurial couple that was interested in rehabbing this building and converting it to a brewery. And that's what they did. It's open. It's got great beer. They use the equipment from the sewing factory as kind of part of the ambiance of the building, but it's a tremendous project in downtown Dyersville called Textile Brewing Company. This is an interesting project in Cascade, Iowa. Cascade's not part of your group, is it? That's a little farther. Oh, it is. It is part of your group? Okay. We did a downtown assessment in Cascade, and I don't think Cascade would mind me saying that they needed some work with downtown buildings. And when we left that assessment, and we are not taking any credit for this, this was all Cascade, but when we left that assessment, there were a couple of buildings in particular that we were worried were in danger of falling down. And one of them was this old bank building. It had roof failure. It's my understanding that a young man that had some carpentry skills, building skills, drove by this. I don't know if he was moving to Cascade or he already lived there, great guy. He acquired the building. He thought it was a shame that the building looked like this. It was his words. He acquired the building, did a first floor rehab. The hope was that a restaurant would go in there. I don't know where Cascade is on that yet, but then 2 upper floor apartments. So they did masonry work. You see the back of the building when it was purchased, pretty bad shape. And it has been restored. They're working on leasing the building right now, but just a terrific project. We're proud of Cascade because they are the only community in the first 3 years of the Catalyst program to receive a grant all 3 years. And it's all 3 projects are very close together too, which I think is really catalytic. Now, some scores of this program say, well, Cascade got 1 grant, let's help someone else. I don't buy that. You know, I think it oftentimes takes 2, 3, 4 projects to really get things going in a downtown. So we're proud of Cascade. Ziering is a small town of 554 people. They had a vacant, another old bank building, structurally sound, but needed a complete rehab. And they did a first floor commercial and then 2 apartments upstairs. Beautiful project to a beautiful building in downtown Ziering. And then I'm almost done here. We have a new program in place called Shop Iowa, shopiowa.com. And I don't know if you've heard of this. We want to get businesses going on this, but this was kind of driven by COVID. But this is IEDA's one-stop shop for small Iowa retailers online. So retailers in the state, businesses, can join up with Shop Iowa, and they can have an online presence to sell things. Now, this is a wake-up call to some businesses, especially ones that still do things old school. But you know, this is a situation where you've got to put products online, you've got to do shipping, that kind of thing. But I would highly encourage city leaders, anyone that's working with the businesses, to go to shopiowa.com and look at the website, and you can kind of scan it by community, you can scan it by business type. It's free right now to get on this. You can list up to 25 products online, but please take a look at this. Just getting this off the ground. I want to close by just talking about a small town survey we did recently, and some of you may have filled this out. One of the biggest issues we get calls a lot from tiny towns and how we can help them. And quite frankly, some of the things I talked about today are challenging to get off the ground, you know, in a really small community. So we wanted to know the issues better. We kind of thought we had an idea. A lot of us are small town people like myself, but we did a survey of communities 1,200 and under. Mostly city clerks filled these out. In some cases, they were mayors. We were a little disappointed with the sample we got. However, you'd be surprised how many of the communities that are 1,200 and under are actually 300 and under. It's a large percentage of them, so many of them don't have downtown. So we knew the sample would be a little small, but I think we got about a quarter of the communities under 1,200 filled out the survey. We asked them to describe their downtown as you'd expect. They talked about a small business mix, maybe no downtown, small in size, no businesses, buildings in disrepair. Their greatest needs, more businesses, cleaning up the rehabbing properties. There's a lot more talk about demolition in small towns than you would see in larger towns. Street maintenance, building demo, replacing sidewalks. These are the business types that small communities think that they could actually keep and succeed in downtown. Restaurants, coffee shops, gas stations, beauty shops, grocery, clothing, insurance offices. We do surveys prior to our downtown assessments, and that list is a little different than larger towns, with the exception of the top one. Everyone wants more food, more restaurants. And it's pretty important for a tiny town too. Grocery, you know, came up more often in a small town, of course. Insurance office, I never saw that in the survey before. So that was interesting. What's the best feature of your downtown? Park and playground was number 1. businesses would come up in a larger town quite often. But most of the small towns mentioned a specific business. It was usually a restaurant or a bar that was like their best feature in the downtown. Average number of businesses in a downtown of less than 1,200 people is just under 7. And the average number of retailers is only 1.37 in towns that size. That surprised us. But I think most disappointing to us was this last question we asked, is downtown worth saving? And it was the bottom number there that disappointed us. We didn't think that would be that high. We were hoping most communities would see a value in doing work in their downtown. But quite frankly, some of the situations we saw, were communities of 100 people that didn't even think there was a feasibility of a business or a downtown anymore. So maybe it is fair, but we partially did that survey to understand the issues, but then now we have kind of a list of communities that we saw some potential based on the answers. So we're going to give away some free downtown walkarounds to maybe half a dozen of these and get the ball rolling and keep those surveys in front of us and keep talking to the people that filled those out. I think I'm out of time. Is there a way to ask questions, Marla?
There was a question in the chat, but I believe somebody else answered it already.
Oh, good.
I have a question, and if there are others, just put them in the chat. Do you have a list of communities that other communities could go tour?
Yeah.
At all, Jim?
Yeah, I could do that in a general way, and I could do it by population size, or if there's something specific that you're interested that you're trying to get off the ground, like the whole downtown housing thing. We're always giving lists of communities that have licked that to other communities. For example, this is the other part of the state for you, but Woodbine is a town of about 1,200 people. And all of their upper stories are full of apartments. They did an amazing job, and this is a tiny little town. So yeah, we can do that. If you just send me an email, if you're just looking at kind of general success stories with downtown development, if you could kind of just give me an idea of community size or what you're looking for, if there's something specific, then I'll put my head together with my staff and we'll come up with lists. We would be happy to do that. And again, we'd be happy to visit anyone. You don't have to sign up for one of our services or anything like that if you just want to meet. I mean, we like to get out in the state and talk to people.
Awesome. Does anyone have any questions at all? Nope. Okay. Jim, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jim.
Exactly what we wanted.
All righty. Thank you. Call me if you need me.
We will.
Okay. I know how to get a hold of you.
Okay. Moving right along, our next topic is police protection. It's a panel discussion on 28E agreements versus contract agreements. And today we have Teresa Weinshank with the City of Preston. She's their administrator, along with the Preston Police Chief, Scott Heyer. And then Beth Bonds with the City of Asbury. She's the administrator there, along with Tom Henneberry. He's the Asbury Police Chief. I didn't know if I saw Tom hop on or not. We have a few phone users, so I can't tell. Is Tom?
He's on.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Oh, there you are. Sorry. I didn't, the last name. Makes sense now. And then also we have our legal expert today, William, or I'm sorry, let's see here. Is Marla, do you see William?
It's Bill.
Bill. Okay, gotcha. I see Bill now. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Bill.
Perfect. So William Supel, or Bill, he's our attorney with Meredith, Supel, and Downer. So we'll kind of start off with just each community talking about what they have in place currently, how it's working, how, maybe like some challenges with it. And then also then we'll have our legal advice as far as, what works, what's best for communities, or, some ideas on, if you have a town, X amount of people, this works good, or just kind of throw some ideas out there for our communities on the phone or on the Zoom call here. So Beth, do you want to start? Beth?
I was actually going to have
Asbury?
Tom start because he's
Okay.
more directly involved.
Sure. So the city of Asbury, we have a 2080 agreement with the city of Dubuque and the Dubuque County Sheriff's Department. Asbury's got a unique situation because we are so located right next to the city of Dubuque and closely to the Sheriff's Department. So we kind of get the mix of assisting a lot with Dubuque city calls and the county sheriff calls. So a lot of times we feel like, I don't want to say the word abused, but kind of get kind of run around quite a bit assisting everybody, which we're glad to do, because at the same time, we are not currently a full 24/7 police department. So we are glad to use the sheriff's department when we're unable to provide coverage for our city. So that works pretty well for us. Some of the drawbacks of that, of course, being so close to the city of Dubuque's area, is they don't always come assist us. We rely more on the sheriff's department. So any other questions or comments about that?
Maybe we'll jump over to the city of Preston, and then we can open it up for, like if you've ever talked about getting a contract, having a contract. Call there. If there's if you've looked into other options or anything like that, or if this is kind of just working for now, or that kind of thing. So I don't know if we should wait till the end, or if we want to have Preston go. Marla, do you think? Are we good with that? Okay. So just hold tight there, Tom.
Okay.
And is the police chief with Preston on? I know. Let's see.
Scott, are
Can you hear
you
me?
on?
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
The phone number now. Yep. Okay, perfect, Scott. If you want to start, or if Teresa, you want to just talk a little bit about what you guys have in place?
Yeah, we have a contract through two of the local small towns next to us. Preston's roughly size of 1,000, then we got Miles, about 450, and then Spragueville about population of 80. We have a contract through them. We just changed it this year that we're looked at over every year and go over everything. We have an attorney write that up for us, so it's set in stone. Basically, we cover calls whenever they need us. We are not a 24-hour department, so we also have a contract through 2080 agreement through the county as well. So when we're not on, they'll come in, they'll take the initial call, and then they'll hand it over to us when we come back on duty. So it's just a pretty smooth operation we have going on. This has been in place for probably, I would say, 10, 15 years. I started here 2010 part-time, and it's been here since I started. So I took over as chief of police roughly 6 years ago, and we haven't had any issues with it so far. The biggest thing is communications between the towns and the council meetings, and other than that, it's pretty smooth sailing. We don't have any issues with it.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add that our 2080s with Miles and Spragueville are paid contracts for police protection.
Okay. And Teresa, is that like based on so many hours a week or a month, or does that work?
It's based on hours, and it is based on the cost of a police officer. So if, for example, Miles is at 20 or was at 20 hours, and then we had Spragueville at 5 hours. So they would expect police protection, dedicated protection for that amount of time. However, if something, let's say there's an incident in Miles and it goes over the 20 hours, they do not get billed for that. It's just worked in. And I don't know, Scott, if you want to add a little on that.
Sure. Like you said, we got our hours that are set over there, but we've worked multiple times this year. It just fluctuates every year depending on calls, but we've been over miles quite a bit this year with search warrants and just certain calls that we definitely go over our time over there, but it's not like we're just going to up and say, oh, our time's done, we can't be over here anymore. We definitely help them out as much as we can. Miles is also part of our school districts. We got our elementary school over there, so it's amazing that we can do what we do and keep the school districts all in one law enforcement area. It just helps out quite a bit.
And just to give the rest of the group a perspective, how far away is Miles, Scott, and Spragueville?
Spragueville is probably roughly 2 miles, 3 miles, and then I would say 4 or 5 miles. So
And
we're not all within 10-mile radius.
Okay. Okay. Do you have anything else to add? Like, do you revisit that contract every year, or is it, you know, and say, hey, last year we were actually here, you know, more hours than the 20. Do we need to negotiate a little bit, or is it one of those things where you just kind of keep it at 20 and, you know, just.
We just switched it this last year to every year we visit the contracts. It used to be every 2 or 3 years. 3 years, I think it was. It's just more feasible to look at it every year so everybody's on the same page, and it's just fair to all 3 cities just to be on the same page. And I go to, or me or my other officer go to every council meeting, so if something needs to be addressed, we tell them each month we're there, if there's anything you guys need, let us know. And it works well. Just biggest things, communication, like I said.
Can we back up and have Bill Supel discuss the difference between a contract and a 28E agreement?
Sure. If everyone's okay with that.
Don't get too witty.
So, you know, they're both legally binding agreements. 28E refers to a chapter in the code that allows for public entities to jointly perform services or functions that they could do legally by themselves. So the purpose is to allow for more efficiencies and cost effectiveness. So they're both legally binding agreements. You know, whether you have just a straight contract for services or the 28E. The way I look at it, and of course everyone would want to talk to their city attorney before entering into either one of them. But the way I look at these when approached is, what is the community actually paying for or doing? If there's going to be shared services, an ability to direct the patrol or the hours to or use of facilities, things like that, then that would be a 28E agreement. I would insist on that and to spell those out. If it is really just X number of hours for, you know, a set fee or price, I think that just a standard contract would suffice in that situation. Now, you know, other people are pretty adamant that, you know, you have a 28E agreement. I don't think that would impact the city's ability to enforce just a simple contract like that. So that's the, you know, that's the way I approach it. I don't know what else you want me to talk about. I mean, you know, the code provides for certain things for a 28E agreement. You know, the minimum requirements would be the duration, the purpose of the agreement, the manner of financing, how it pays, who pays, how much, whether an entity or organization is created, and whether that's compensated or not. Set forth a budgeting mechanism, terms of a termination and disposal of property upon termination, and then other necessary and appropriate matters. That's the minimum requirement under a 28E agreement. But frankly, those are the type of things you put in a contract as well. But obviously there would not be an organization created or a joint venture type of situation. I mean, obviously Asbury in their situation, certainly a 28E is the appropriate way to go. How about Preston? Do you have simple contracts or 28E agreements with Miles and?
We have
So-
contracts through Miles and Spragueville. With county, we have the 28E agreement.
Yeah. And that makes
also-
sense. A lot of the cities that I'm doing a contract for, they don't have any police protection. So it's simply a contract with the county or an adjoining city. There is no chief or even part-time employees.
And I
so
do know that our county is working with the smaller communities around here. They've been doing it for free the last several years, but they're going to be working on getting something together to where they're going to have to be given some kind of contract where they're going to have to pay a little bit of something for the coverage.
Interesting.
But that could all change now too. We got a different sheriff coming in, so.
Yeah. And that was pretty standard fare up until about the mid 90s, is that, these little towns, the sheriff, they patrolled them and they didn't charge anything for it. But as budgets tightened up, that changed. And, went up.
Another thing we have too is Savannah being right across the river. They also have a 28 agreement that they can come across and help us out whenever requested as well. So it's not just state by state. We can jump across, and we have Illinois to help us too. I found that to be interesting when I first started here as well.
I find that interesting as well. They're not licensed in Iowa, are they?
They're different, yeah. Because I know we had a officer go over there and he had to take a refresher just for Illinois laws.
Okay. So you do have some sort of certification to allow you to work in each other's states, yeah.
So I guess the reason why we kind of had this on our agenda is we've had some anecdotal stories saying, we just have, we have a 28 agreement with the county, but they basically drive through our town and leave. We can't get notices served. What would your advice be to those communities that are facing those issues?
Communication. You need to talk to the sheriff, and that should be done, on a regular basis. Like the chief was saying, go to the council meetings, have them come to council meetings, have them discuss these issues. But and it doesn't have to be adversary. I've spoke on this topic a few times over the years, and I've always been surprised at how much animosity there is in between cities and sheriff's departments on police protection, because I have not experienced that. The sheriff's departments that I've worked with have been overly generous with my cities. You may have a minimum number of hours, but those are always exceeded. But also you need to understand that, it's not your department and you don't have control over, when they come through. You may want to talk to them and say, these are the times that we'd like to patrol a little bit. I know when school starts, a couple of my cities are always asking the sheriff to, try to be in town around 3 o'clock when school lets out, because you get a bunch of hot rodding kids, and those type of things. But it's communication, and you also need to set your priorities and set your expectations. This isn't your police department, and so you do have to sort of take the good with the bad on that.
I can say it like this, you're pretty much getting what you're paying for. And when I'm saying that, I'm agreeing with what Bill's saying, you know. Most of these counties have 3 deputies, if they're lucky, working. So in Dubuque County, for instance, there's 21, 22 cities within our county. Some of those cities have law enforcement, most do not. So these deputies, you can imagine, get spread pretty thin. So if a smaller town will say, Centralia is saying, hey, I want your deputies here to sit for 3 hours a day, that might not be very practical. You know, those deputies, they're handling accidents and calls throughout the whole county, and they're trying to spread that 3 hours for your city. So that's why a lot of cities will just say, well, you know what, it might be cheaper and more beneficial to hire a police officer and have him here when we want those officers here, and to do those civil things and get out in the know of the public, and sometimes learn how to handle their citizens within their community. So.
Yeah.
Anybody else got anything to add to that? So.
There are communities, I know, such as Grimes in Polk County, where they don't have a police department per se for Grimes, but they do contract with the Polk County Sheriff's Office Department to pay for that coverage through a contract with the Polk County Sheriff's Department, which Polk County then has specific officers then that they dedicate to the community of Grimes. So it may not be necessary for a community to, you know, hire their own officer, but they may be able to work out contractually by paying the county or another, you know, city for, you know, having that, you know, commitment for a number of hours in their community.
Yes, that's right. And I think, you know, Grimes pays a pretty penny for that. I think they end up paying $350,000 a year for that service.
Well, Grimes is a pretty big community too, though.
It is a big community. Yeah, I think they're the biggest community in the state with the police department.
I think they're the fastest growing right now, one of them in the state anyway, as far as population. For those of you that do have your own police officers employed, do you have any kind of, because another anecdotal story is, you know, they hire a police officer and they send them through the academy and pay for all that, and then they leave. What would your advice be for that? I mean, do you guys have work time requirements, or, you know, they have to stay here for 5 years before they, you know, or they have to pay that money back, or how does that work for your departments?
Yeah, a lot of cities have had contracts. The problem with some of those contracts is most departments will pay those contracts out. So if I hire somebody from another department, sometimes we're just willing to get that officer, we'll buy that contract back. So honestly, I haven't seen them worth a lot to stop officers from leaving or coming. Getting officers, especially in today's environment, is a really hard thing to come by, because honestly, you can just flip on your TV and see what's going on with the world of law enforcement. Not a lot of people want to do this job for what they're getting paid to do. That being said, there's still people with a calling that feel like this is the kind of line of work they want to get into. The best way to keep officers is trying to keep them happy, as far as it may not be pay, it may not be the great insurance that we get, it might be the training that we can provide, or the other services that, you know, hey, we'll be more flexible in our shifts that you work, and we'll be more flexible with days off. There's things like that you can do to just try to keep your employees happy. It's a constant battle, though. I mean, because as soon as we give somebody a pay raise, the next town next to us says, we're going to bump our pay up now. It's a constant leapfrog of the pay and insurance benefits that go along with this job. And we're always fighting that with our city council members, and you're trying to walk that fine line between paying somebody too much, well, not too much, I shouldn't say that word. A fine line between taxes and doing your job, kind of a thing. It's always a fine line to walk. So yeah, I don't know if the other chief can mention anything about that, how they feel about it.
I was just going to say, in addition, like Tom talked about, that we have bought out some contracts for officers that were interested in, you know, coming to Asbury, but in the converse, we've also had hired officers and sent to the academy, and we have them sign agreement that if they do leave, then they need to, pay back that contract pro rata over 5 years, depending on when they leave.
Yeah, and I don't, those, I would strongly urge communities to have those contracts. They aren't necessarily, as Scott said, they're not necessarily going to stop you from losing that officer, but it does allow you to recoup some of those costs, because that's historically been a real problem for smaller communities, is they can't pay, the salary that an officer could get in a larger community. And, so you do end up becoming sort of a training ground for, and a lot of turnover, which, is frustrating for smaller towns.
Did you have anything to add? No. Okay. Sorry, just didn't want him to get cut off. So in the chat box, we do have a few questions. I think this is probably for Bill. Wondering if the 28E agreements must be filed with the Iowa Secretary of State. Is that correct?
Yes,
Okay.
they do. Those are electronically filed now. It used to be you file them with the county and the state, but now it's just the Secretary of State. But yes, they do have to be filed.
Okay. Now we have another question for communities that have a contract with the Sheriff Department. If you pay a rate per resident, what is the rate?
Well, it's whatever you agree to.
Well, I think
I can't answer that. It's because, my cities have all done an hourly rate, and I haven't looked into or had a need to look into the per capita type rate. The rates that have been quoted to my cities have been in the $29 an hour to $35 an hour range.
So, but that's kind of, Bill, what that kind of tells me is they're looking for hours of coverage, and the county is able to, based on wages and benefits to what they're paying their officers, that they're probably better able to, come up with an hourly rate and say this many hours in the community than to pay per capita, which I don't know what that says. I mean, we have per capita for our fire department, but they are not, their coverage is as needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same thought goes into, what it's going to cost you. If you're charging you $30 an hour and you're getting 90 hours a month, well, that's what it costs. I'm guessing that if you're going to do it per capita, it's still going to average out to about that range, would be my guess.
And Bill, in some of those departments, are they paying just the officer, or are they also paying for the equipment such as a squad car and any other fees that might go along with that?
Yeah, the ones I have, that's a flat rate, and so they're getting the officer. They aren't paying any extra fees or anything like that.
Okay.
Bill, have you ever seen in the communities that you're city attorney for, have they shared the cost of a police officer rather than contracting or 28E?
That's what contracts
No.
for, sharing.
They not the cities I represent. The closest we've come is one of my cities, paid extra money, which enabled the county to hire a couple more deputies, with the thought that they would get more dedicated service, and again, they have a good relationship, so it's sort of a trust issue, and obviously that'll be revisited as time goes on. But I have not had a city that's had an officer or police department or a shared situation. I worked a little bit with Farley and Epworth when they created a joint police department, but I don't think that lasted very long.
Did not.
I had high hopes for that. I ran around this big deal this was for those two communities, but they just.
It should have worked in theory. They were close enough, same size, everything was there. I think just different philosophies and their politics.
I think that's it. It's those damn town team baseball leagues.
Yep.
They have such animosity. I knew it wouldn't work with Dyersville, of course, but
Yeah.
I had high hopes for Farley and Epworth.
Yeah. So, Bill, how's that also work? I mean, other agencies, I'll use Preston as an example, and Miles. So if you're contracting into the town and you are injured in that other town, does the city of Preston then cover that officer as far as injuries or workman's comp or anything like that? Or
Well, it depends on how you have it set up. Under my scenario where you're just contracting, I make it clear in the agreement that that you're just contracting for this service. They are not employees of the contracting city. So any work comp injury, any liability remains with Preston.
falls back on the other city, yeah.
Mhm.
And have other cities been okay with that? Because like I said, I'm out with a stalled car and I'm pushing the car and I twist my ankle now working for one city, and they come back to me and say, well, you should have been pushing that car. Who's having that argument?
Well, it shouldn't be the argument because you're always going to be the police officer for the city of Preston or the chief for the city of Preston. So when you're working, you're still working for Preston. You're just working
In another city.
Yeah.
Correct.
But
And
that has to be,
with
you have to be clear
Preston?
with that. And obviously talk to your insurance carrier as well to make sure that that you have that taken care of. But I make that clear in my contracts that they
Gotcha.
are independent contractors. What
Sorry,
else?
Teresa, did you have anything to add there, or Scott?
Just that's how we have it set up here. All the liabilities through Preston. If something were to happen to us, it's Preston's liability. It's not Miles or Spragueville. And like Bill said, that is in our contracts. And
That is correct, and it's in our cost for what we charge for the police protection.
Could you share that cost, Teresa? I mean, as far as what do you bill, what's in the contract, just to give these smaller cities an idea of what they might be looking at for if they were to do some kind of contract with another neighboring town.
We are looking at total cost of what a police officer in Preston is, and that is $46 an hour.
Okay. So you just do 46 and then whatever many hours they have in the contract?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so Miles is paying $20 a month at $46 an hour. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they're at 20 hours.
Yeah.
Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Or it's a very interesting subject.
So how do you all communicate this to the public? Like
Say that again.
your
You're
agreement.
breaking up.
How do you communicate your agreement to the public, or do you not?
Well, it's approved at a council meeting. It's discussed. It's on the agenda if anyone cares to look at the agenda. But generally, I mean, again, I haven't had a city recently to enter into a new agreement. So, I would recommend if you're thinking about that, and this would be a new agreement, I would encourage the city council to hold a couple of work sessions, get public input, find out what they need, give them a true idea of what it's going to cost if, you know, if they get what they want, and then, and, you know, and have those be really before you talk with the whoever you hope to contract with, so that you have a pretty good understanding of where you're at, and then you present that to the other entity, saying, here's what we're looking for, this is the cost we're looking for, can you do that for us? I think when you're starting these out, and, you know, periodically, again, we have longstanding contracts with sheriffs, so there hasn't been a lot of discussion in the last several years about them. They just sent us a new contract because we know what we're getting. But, you know, if you're having issues, I think it's important to, you know, to discuss that, and you know, and to, you know, keep your powder dry when you begin these discussions, unless you have an alternative, you know, because they don't have to contract with you. You know, you
I'm
don't want
guessing
to
it's one of those things where you don't want to say, hey, we'll be in your community from 4 to 8 every night. You don't want to announce that to the public. It's more of just.
And that's right. You know, there's some truth to that. So I remember.
I would say one of our biggest sells would probably be the school district, since we're so close mile-wise to each other, that's a huge sell to the community. And the mere fact that, like someone else mentioned earlier, there might be 1 or 2 deputies working on the county, and if we're 2 minutes away, they could be 30 to 40 minutes away responding to a call, depending on where they're at in the county. So it just, there's pros and cons to it, just different ways you got to look at it. And that's why I believe a work session would be great as well. You got to look at pros and cons and outweigh if you're thinking about looking into contract or 2080.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Does anybody else have any questions while we're still on? Everyone's so shy on Zoom. I think we hit everything in the chat as far as questions. Let's see. So I will just end with thank you guys so much for helping us out on this panel and giving us some perspective, and hopefully some other cities. Yeah.
I'll just say, probably one closing thing, for these, communities that are looking to make changes to their, police coverage is to, really think about, what are they looking for as far as coverage or level of service, and what are their community issues are. And, probably if you're a small town, the affordability of, 24/7, police coverage is not there, but maybe be looking at, maybe you want more than just a flyby by the sheriff's office, but look at your budget and, see what, kind of coverage that you can want to afford to offer your community.
And on that note, I should also add, right now, there is a lot of grants available for departments trying to start up. I believe Asbury did that at one point at a 4-year grant that says the first year they'll pay 100%, the second year 75%, next year 50%, and then 25%, and then the city's on its own after that. So there are things out there to help small agencies get up and running.
Yeah, and the code and the Supreme Court has given the city pretty wide latitude on how they police their city. It's required. You have to provide police service either through a chief or a 2080 agreement. But other than that, you have the right. I know that, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Fairfax, or from Fairfax had looked at having a chief and then hiring private security, like a Permar security, to drive around town. Now, they didn't have arrest authority, but they had a presence, and then they would contact either the sheriff's office or the police chief if they saw something suspicious. That was several years ago. I don't know whatever happened to that, if that worked out or not. But that's another way to look at it. Or just to hire to have one officer and then contract for the other services. At least then you'd have somebody who you could have more control over if that becomes an issue in your town, that you don't think you're getting the service that your citizens are demanding.
Yeah. And there's other options like reserve officers or auxiliary officers, kind of the same thing as the private security. They don't have authority, arrest authorities, can't handle OWI or alcohol offenses. And there's some other stipulations with them as well, but those are other resources to look at.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for those perspectives and for all the information. Any last comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. As Marla said in the beginning, she did try to get the IMFAO credits, and we were unable to with the virtual. And that's for the clerks that are on the call here. So hopefully next time we'll be able to get those credits.
You were unable to?
Yeah, we were, because of the virtual platform.
Really?
So Bill, do you know anything about that?
Well, no, but I mean, I think everyone's virtual. I mean, I know I've done my CLEs are all been virtual. No one's meeting. I don't know why they wouldn't.
Yeah.
I've reached out to the Iowa League of Cities. I've had the IMFOA, a couple of board members, and they are not recognizing these virtual meetings as in-person contact.
Really? Huh.
The Iowa
Is that
League,
because of me? Is that a reflection on me? They just think that I'm not, if I'm not live, that it. I feel cheated. That's bad. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
we've tried. Marla's went above and beyond trying. So just wanted to throw that out there. If you guys want to call them, feel free and advocate for next time, because I don't know what it looks like in the spring. So who knows? We'll still be doing virtual or not. Hopefully not, but probably so. So, but thanks for taking the time and joining us today. And we miss everybody's faces. And like I said, if you have any ideas for future trainings or presentations that you'd like to see, let us know, or an email or a phone call away. Marla, did you have anything to add?
nope, I just want to thank all the speakers. I know some have gone off the call, but thank you for this panel and the other speakers for taking the time. We really appreciate it. We don't have a big budget to pay speakers. So Bill, do not send us a bill, please.
Well, you know, that's probably about what I'm worth.
Oh. Well, and if you have any questions, call Bill.
I do have a little outline I prepared, Marla. I'll send that to you, and you can send that off to everybody who was on the call.
Great.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Free advice, everyone.
Yes,
everyone loves free legal advice.
Well, you get what you pay for.
Exactly.
You jumped right in there, didn't you, Scott?
It's Tom.
That's okay. All right. Well, thanks, everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a great afternoon. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.